The dying fleet Admiral Zixthara stood on the bridge of the Crystal Dawn, watching her fleet die around her. The great ship shuddered as another piece of damaged hull broke away and drifted into space. Through the viewing screens, she could see the broken remains of what had once been the pride of the Kethmori civilization. The crystalline ships that made up her armada were never meant for war. They were built for exploration, for trade, for peaceful journeys between the stars. Their hulls were made of a special crystal that could bend light and create beautiful patterns as they moved through space. But now, those same hulls were cracked and bleeding atmosphere into the cold void. Zixthara touched her communicator. "Report," she said quietly. "Admiral, we've lost another ship," came the voice of her second-in-command. The Singing Stone just went dark. Life support failed. We managed to get most of the crew off, but... She closed her eyes. The Singing Stone had been one of their fastest ships. Now it was just another piece of dead metal floating in space. That made 60 ships lost in the past week. 60 out of 100 that had started this journey. The Vorth hegemony had come without warning. They had swept through Kethmori space like a dark storm, destroying everything in their path. The Kethmori had tried to fight back, but their mining lasers and cargo shields were no match for real weapons of war. Zixthara walked to the tactical display. Red dots showed the positions of the remaining Kethmori ships. So few of them left. Green dots showed damaged vessels that could barely move. Yellow dots marked ships that were completely dead, but still had crew aboard. "How many survivors do we have total?" she asked. Her tactical officer looked up from his station. His face was pale, and his usually bright blue skin had turned a sickly gray color. "Approximately 40,000, Admiral. Spread across the surviving ships. 40,000. Once, the Kethmori fleet had carried nearly 200,000 souls. Explorers, traders, scientists, families who had been traveling between worlds when the attack came. Now most of them were gone. And our weapons?" Zixthara asked, though she already knew the answer. "Mining lasers only, Admiral. We have some torpedo tubes, but they're loaded with survey probes, not weapons. Our shields can stop small asteroids, but they won't hold against another Vorth attack." Zixthara nodded. She had been an admiral in peacetime, leading expeditions to new worlds and making contact with friendly alien species. She had never commanded ships in battle before last week. None of them had. The Kethmori were a peaceful people. They had been traveling among the stars for thousands of years, but always as friends and traders. They built beautiful cities on crystal worlds and created art that could be seen from orbit. War was something they read about in ancient history books, not something they expected to face. But the Vorth hegemony didn't care about art or peace or ancient friendships. They cared only about conquest. They had swept through this sector of space, enslaving or destroying every civilization they found. The Kethmori were just the latest in a long line of victims. "Admiral," her communications officer called out. "We're getting reports from the outer ships. They're detecting movement on long-range sensors." Zixthara felt her heart sink. "The Vorth?" "Unknown, Admiral. The signatures don't match anything in our database. But there are a lot of them. At least 30 ships, maybe more." She closed her eyes again. If it was the Vorth coming back to finish them off, there was nothing they could do. Their ships were too damaged to run, and they had no weapons to fight with. All they could do was send out their children in the few remaining escape pods and hope that someone, somewhere, would take care of them. "Should we prepare for another attack, Admiral?" her tactical officer asked. Zixthara looked around the bridge. Her crew was looking at her with tired, hopeless eyes. They were good people who had followed her across the galaxy because they believed in exploration and discovery. They didn't deserve to die like this. Hunted down and destroyed by an enemy that saw them as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. But maybe there was one last thing she could do. Open a general distress channel, she ordered. Send it on all frequencies, as far as our transmitters can reach. Her communications officer looked confused. Admiral, if we broadcast our position, the Vorth will find us even faster. They'll find us anyway, Zixthara said quietly. But maybe someone else will hear us first. The communications officer nodded and began working at his station. After a few moments, he looked up. Channel open, Admiral. Zixthara took a deep breath. She thought about all the species they had met over the years. The peaceful Threnody who sang to their plants to make them grow. The wise Elkari who had taught them how to navigate by the patterns of pulsars. The friendly Zephyrians who loved to trade stories and jokes. Maybe one of them would hear this message. Maybe one of them would remember the Kethmori fondly enough to help. This is Admiral Zixthara of the Kethmori fleet, she began. We are under attack by the Vorth hegemony. Our ships are damaged, our weapons are gone, and we have 40,000 civilians who need help. We are sending our location coordinates with this message. She paused, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vorth ships were getting closer. Somewhere out there, her people's homeworld was probably already burning. We know we have no right to ask for help, she continued. We are strangers to most of you, and we have nothing to offer in return. But if there is anyone out there who still believes that some things are worth fighting for, we could use your aid. Our children are counting on us to keep them safe. She gestured to her communications officer, and he closed the channel. Now what, Admiral? Her second-in-command asked. Zixthara looked around the bridge one more time. Through the viewing screens, she could see the other ships in her small fleet. Broken, damaged, but still flying. Still carrying the hopes and dreams of her people. Now we wait, she said simply. And we hope that somewhere in this galaxy, there are still people who answer when others call for help. An unexpected response Captain Sarah Chun stood in the communication room of the UESS Defiant, staring at the message they had just received. The voice speaking through the static was unlike anything she had ever heard before. It was musical, almost like singing, but filled with such sadness that it made her chest tight. Play it again, she told Lieutenant Morrison, a communications officer. The alien voice filled the room once more. Even though the translation software was doing its job, Sarah could hear the desperation underneath the words. Someone was calling for help, and they were very far from home. Captain, Morrison said, the computer has finished analyzing the signal. It's coming from approximately 6 light-years away. The language is completely new to our database, but the universal translation protocols are working. Sarah nodded. 6 light-years. They could reach that location in about 2 days if they pushed their engines hard. The question was whether they should. The UESS Defiant was part of humanity's first deep space exploration fleet. They had been traveling for 3 months now, making contact with new species and exploring star systems that no human had ever seen before. Earth was very far behind them, and they were completely on their own out here. Sarah's fleet consisted of just 12 ships. The Defiant was the largest, a heavy cruiser that had been built from the hull of an old cargo ship. The other vessels were a mix of science ships, supply vessels, and 3 smaller warships that had been added to the fleet as escorts. They weren't an invasion force or a military armada. They were explorers sent out to see what was beyond the edge of human space. But every ship in the fleet carried weapons because space was a dangerous place. And humanity had learned to be careful. Captain, said Commander Torres, her second-in-command, we don't know anything about this species or their situation. For all we know, this could be a trap. Sarah understood his concern. Humanity had only been traveling between the stars for about 50 years. In that time, they had met 17 different alien species. Most of them had been friendly, but a few had tried to attack or trick the human explorers. "What do you think, Commander Jackson?" Sarah asked her tactical officer. Jackson was a tall woman with graying hair who had served in the Earth Defense Forces before joining the exploration fleet. She looked at the tactical display, thinking carefully. "The signal is definitely coming from where they say it is," Jackson said. "And the energy readings suggest multiple ships, but they're all running on very low power. If this is a trap, it's not a very good one." Sarah walked to the main viewing screen and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, people were dying. She could hear it in that alien admiral's voice. The same kind of desperation that human soldiers had felt when they were surrounded by enemies, with no way out. Humanity had been in that situation before. During the resource wars, when the corporations had tried to take over the outer colonies, small groups of human ships had sent out desperate calls for help. Sometimes those calls had been answered. Sometimes they hadn't. "How long would it take us to get there?" Sarah asked her navigator. "2 days at maximum speed, Captain. But we'd be using a lot of fuel." Sarah thought about her orders. The exploration fleet had been sent out to make peaceful contact with alien civilizations and to study new star systems. Nothing in their mission briefing had said anything about getting involved in alien wars, but her orders had also told her to use her best judgment when faced with unexpected situations. And right now, her judgment was telling her that someone needed help. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, "can you send a reply message?" Morrison looked surprised. "Yes, Captain. But are you sure we should reveal our position?" "Send this message," Sarah said. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Exploration Fleet. We received your distress call and we are coming to help. Hold your position if you can. We will be there in 2 days." Morrison's eyes went wide. "Captain, should we ask Earth Command for permission first?" Sarah shook her head. "By the time we got permission from Earth, those people would be dead. Send the message." Morrison nodded and began working at his station. After a few moments, he looked up. "Message sent, Captain." Sarah turned to address her bridge crew. "I want all ships to prepare for maximum speed. And send a message to the other captains. Tell them to join me in the briefing room in 1 hour." An hour later, Sarah sat at the head of the conference table in the Defiance briefing room. The holographic images of her other 11 ship captains flickered around the table. Some of them looked excited. Others looked worried. Captain Rodriguez of the science ship Discovery spoke first. "Sarah, are you sure about this? We don't know anything about this war or which side is right." "We know that someone is asking for help," Sarah replied. "And we know they have children on those ships who are in danger." Captain Kim of the escort ship Ranger leaned forward. "What if we're not strong enough to help? Our ships weren't designed for heavy combat." Sarah had been thinking about the same thing. The human fleet was small, and their weapons were mostly designed for defense against pirates and small raiders. If they were flying into a major battle, they might not be able to make much difference. But then she remembered something her grandfather had told her. He had been a pilot during the resource wars, and he had always said that it wasn't the size of the fleet that mattered. It was the willingness to fight for something bigger than yourself. "Maybe we're not strong enough," Sarah admitted. "But we're what they've got. And sometimes, when people are desperate enough, even a small amount of help can make all the difference." Captain Williams of the supply ship Endeavour spoke up. "What about our mission? We're supposed to be exploring, not fighting wars." "Our mission is to represent humanity among the stars," Sarah said. "And humanity has always stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. If we ignore this call for help, what does that say about who we are?" The room was quiet for a moment. Sarah could see her captains thinking, weighing the risks against their duty as human beings. Finally, Captain Martinez of the escort ship Guardian smiled. "Well, I didn't join the exploration fleet to play it safe. If we're doing this, count me in. One by one, the other captains nodded their agreement. Some looked scared, others looked determined, but all of them looked ready to do what was right. All right then, Sarah said. Let's go answer a distress call. Improvised Warfare Admiral Zixthara watched through her viewing screen as the strange new ships approached her fleet. The human vessels looked nothing like any spacecraft she had ever seen before. Where Kethmori ships were smooth and graceful, these were angular and rough. They looked like they had been built by someone who cared more about function than beauty. The lead ship sent another message. This is Captain Chun of the Defiant. Admiral, we'd like to come alongside your ship and meet with you in person. Zixthara looked at her crew. They were all staring at the human ships with confusion and wonder. The humans had actually come. Someone had heard their desperate call for help and had traveled across space to find them. Tell them they are welcome aboard, she said an hour later. Zixthara stood in her ship's main meeting room, waiting to meet the beings who had come to help them. When the door opened, she was surprised by what she saw. The humans were shorter than Kethmori, and their skin was a warm brown color instead of blue. They had hair on their heads and smaller eyes, but when Captain Chun looked at her, Zixthara could see intelligence and kindness in those eyes. Admiral, Captain Chun said, bowing slightly. I'm sorry we couldn't get here sooner. Zixthara felt her throat tighten with emotion. You came at all. That is more than we dared to hope for. Captain Chun looked around the meeting room, and Zixthara could see her taking in the damage. Cracks in the crystal walls, flickering lights. The smell of burned electronics in the air. Tell me what happened, Captain Chun said simply. Zixthara explained about the Vorth hegemony, about the attack on her people's worlds, about the desperate flight across space with the remnants of her fleet. Captain Chun listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each detail. How many ships do the Vorth have? Captain Chun asked when Zixthara finished. The scout reports suggest at least 200 vessels in the main fleet, Zixthara said. All of them purpose-built for war. Captain Chun was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, and Zixthara was surprised to see that the human actually looked pleased by this news. 200 ships, Captain Chun said. Well, that's a challenge. Zixthara stared at her. Captain, I don't think you understand. My people are not warriors. Our ships are not warships. We have only 40 working vessels left, and most of them can barely fly. Admiral, Captain Chen said, I think you're not giving your people enough credit. You've kept your fleet together and your people alive, while being hunted across space by an enemy with superior numbers and firepower. That tells me your people are tougher than you think. Over the next several hours, Captain Chun and her officers toured the Kethmori ships. Zixthara watched in amazement as the humans examined everything with intense curiosity. They asked questions about the crystal hull construction, about the mining lasers, about the power systems. These mining lasers, said Commander Jackson, the human tactical officer. How powerful are they? They can cut through solid asteroid rock, replied Zixthara S. engineer. But they're designed for precision work, not combat. Commander Jackson grinned. Ma'am, a laser that can cut through rock can definitely hurt a spaceship. Captain Chun was examining the cargo bays on one of the damaged ships. Admiral, these storage containers, are they reinforced? Yes, Zixthara said. They're designed to survive impacts and pressure changes during transport. And you have manufacturing equipment on your ships? Of course. We are a trading people. We make goods to sell at different worlds. Captain Chun turned to her engineering officer. Commander Walsh, what do you think? Could we turn these cargo containers into missile warheads? The human engineer examined one of the containers carefully. Absolutely, Captain. Pack them with explosives add a simple guidance system, and launch them from the cargo launches. They won't be fancy, but they'll pack a punch. Zixthara was beginning to understand why Captain Chen had smiled when she heard about the odds they faced. The humans didn't see problems. They saw opportunities. Over the next day, the combined human and Kethmori crews worked together to prepare for battle. The humans brought tools and weapons that the Kethmori had never seen before. The Kethmori shared their knowledge of crystal technology and precision engineering. Human engineers welded armor plating onto Kethmori ships. Kethmori technicians helped improve the targeting systems on human weapons. The mining lasers were recalibrated to work as cutting beams that could slice through enemy hulls. Zixthara watched her people working alongside the humans and saw something she hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. For the first time since the attack began, her people believed they might actually survive this. "Admiral," Captain Chen said, joining her at the observation deck, "I wanted to ask you about Vorth tactics. How do they usually attack?" "They prefer to attack in large formations," Zixthara said. "Overwhelming firepower concentrated on single targets. They destroy the strongest ships first, then hunt down the survivors." Captain Chen nodded. "That's what I thought. They're used to fighting enemies who follow standard military procedures." "And you don't follow standard procedures?" Captain Chen laughed. "Admiral, humans didn't even have standard space combat procedures until about 10 years ago. We make it up as we go along." As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's alarms began to sound. Zixthara's communications officer appeared on the viewing screen. "Admiral, we're detecting incoming ships. Vorth signatures. Estimated time to arrival, 4 hours." Captain Chen looked at Zixthara. "Are you ready for this?" Zixthara thought about her people, about the children sleeping in the refugee ships, about all the worlds the Vorth had already destroyed. She thought about these strange humans who had traveled across space just to help strangers. "Yes," she said. "We're ready." "Good," Captain Chen said. "Because I have a plan. And it's absolutely crazy." Zixthara found herself smiling for the first time in days. "Captain, at this point, crazy might be exactly what we need." As the two fleets prepared for battle, Zixthara realized that something had changed. Her ships were still damaged. Her people were still outnumbered. But they were no longer alone. And sometimes that made all the difference. The humans had brought more than just ships and weapons. They had brought something that the Kethmori had almost lost. They had brought the belief that the impossible could become possible if you were willing to fight for it. The Crucible the Vorth fleet arrived exactly when their scouts had predicted. Admiral Krexther stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Fang, and looked at the tactical display with satisfaction. The broken remains of the Kethmori fleet hung in space ahead of him, exactly where they were supposed to be. How many ships? He asked his tactical officer. 53 contacts, Admiral. Most showing heavy damage. Some new signatures we don't recognize, but they're small. Krexther nodded. The Kethmori had probably picked up some refugees from other worlds the Vorth had conquered. It didn't matter. His fleet of 200 ships would finish this quickly. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Standard formation. We'll break their strongest ships first, then hunt down the survivors." But as the Vorth ships moved forward, something unexpected happened. The enemy fleet didn't try to run. Instead, they spread out into a loose formation that made no tactical sense. Some ships moved behind asteroids. Others positioned themselves near debris fields. A few small ships actually accelerated toward the Vorth fleet. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, sounding confused. "They're not following any standard defensive pattern." Krexther frowned. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen ships position themselves like this. It looked like chaos. "No matter," he said. "Signal the attack." The battle began with the Vorth ships firing their main weapons at the largest enemy vessels. But instead of exploding as expected, the Kethmori ships seemed to bend and twist, their crystal hulls deflecting some of the energy blasts. Then the return fire started, and Krexter realized that something was very wrong. The mining lasers that struck his ships weren't behaving like the weak weapons they had encountered before. These beams cut through his armor like it was paper, carving precise holes in his ship's hulls. Explosions began blooming across his fleet as the modified weapons found critical systems. "What are those projectiles?" His tactical officer shouted as strange objects began flying toward the Vorth ships. The cargo containers that had been turned into missiles slammed into Vorth vessels with devastating effect. Each impact sent shockwaves through the enemy formation, and the explosions were far more powerful than anything the Kethmori should have been able to produce. But the real surprise came when the small human ships reached the Vorth formation. Captain Chun watched the tactical display as her plan unfolded. The Vorth were used to fighting enemies who followed rules, who attacked in predictable patterns. But the combined human Kethmori fleet wasn't following any rules at all. "Ranger, this is Defiant," she called over the communication channel. "Execute Maneuver 7. Captain Kim's escort ship suddenly accelerated directly at a Vorth heavy cruiser. The enemy ship's weapons tracked toward the small human vessel, but at the last second, the Ranger fired all its missiles and veered away. The missiles struck the Vorth ship's bridge, and the massive vessel began spinning out of control. Discovery. "You're up," Captain Chun called. The science ship Discovery had been hiding behind an asteroid. Now it emerged and fired its newly installed mining lasers at a cluster of Vorth fighters. The precise beams carved through the small ships like a scalpel through flesh. "Admiral." Zixtara watched from her bridge as the battle raged around them. The humans fought like nothing she had ever seen before. They seemed to take personal pleasure in doing the unexpected, in turning the enemy's size advantage against them. When the Vorth tried to form up into their standard attack formation, human ships would dart in and out of their ranks, causing confusion and friendly fire incidents. When the Vorth spread out to avoid this, the Kethmori mining lasers would pick them off one by one from long range. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out. "The human ship Guardian is in trouble." Zixtara looked at the display. Captain Martinez's ship had been hit by several Vorth weapons and was drifting helplessly. 3 Vorth cruisers were moving in to finish it off. "All ships," Zixtara said into her communicator, "protect our allies." The remaining Kethmori vessels turned toward the threatened human ship. They might not be warriors by nature, but they had learned something from fighting alongside the humans. Sometimes you had to take risks to protect the people fighting beside you. The Crystal Dawn and 2 other Kethmori ships accelerated directly at the Vorth cruisers. Their mining lasers fired continuously, carving deep wounds in the enemy hulls. One of the Vorth ships exploded, and the other 2 were forced to retreat. Captain Chun smiled as she watched the Kethmori ships rescue the Guardian. The aliens were learning. They were becoming fighters. "Captain," Commander Jackson called out, "we're getting reports that the Vorth flagship is trying to retreat." Captain Chun looked at the tactical display. The Iron Fang was indeed pulling back from the battle, but it was still in range. "Commander Torres," she said to her second-in-command, "what's the status of our engines?" "We've got maybe 1 good sprint left in them, Captain. After that, we'll need major repairs." Captain Chun thought for a moment. The Vorth flagship was the command ship for this entire fleet. If they could take it out, the other ships might retreat or surrender. "All right," she said, ramming speed. The bridge crew stared at her. "Captain?" Commander Torres asked. "You heard me. Set course for the Vorth flagship. Maximum acceleration. The Defiant turned and accelerated toward the massive enemy ship. The fourth vessel was 3 times larger than the human cruiser, but Captain Chun had learned something during her years in space. Sometimes size wasn't everything. "Captain," her communications officer said, "we're getting a message from the fourth admiral. He's demanding that we surrender." "Tell him," Captain Chun said, "that humans don't know how to surrender. We only know how to win." The Iron Fang fired everything it had at the approaching human ship. The Defiant shields flared and failed, and armor plating began peeling away from the hull. But the human ship kept coming at the last moment. Captain Chun ordered her weapons to fire. Every missile, every laser, every piece of ordnance the Defiant carried launched at point-blank range into the fourth flagship's hull. The explosion lit up space like a new star. When the light faded, both ships were drifting wrecks. But the fourth flagship was completely dead, while the Defiant still had life support and communications. Admiral Krexter stared at his ruined bridge and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These humans and their Kethmori allies fought like demons. They turned every disadvantage into an advantage, every loss into an opportunity to strike back. "Signal the fleet," he whispered to his surviving communications officer. "Retreat." As the surviving fourth ships fled into hyperspace, Captain Chun sat in her damaged captain's chair and looked around at her crew. They were battered and exhausted, but they were alive. And they had won. "Status report," she said. "Fourth Fleet is in full retreat," Commander Jackson reported. "We estimate they lost about 60 ships. The survivors are running." Captain Chun smiled. "And our allies?" "Kethmori fleet is damaged but intact. They're sending messages of thanks." Captain Chun leaned back in her chair. They had done it. A small fleet of explorers and refugees had defeated a much larger military force. And they had done it by refusing to fight the way their enemies expected. Sometimes, she thought, being unpredictable was the best weapon of all. New Horizons. 3 months later, Admiral Zixtara stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Crystal Dawn and watched the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. Below them, the blue and silver world of Kethmer Prime sparkled in the light of its yellow sun. Her people's homeworld was free. The liberation had taken weeks of careful planning and coordination between human and Kethmori forces. The fourth garrison had been strong, but they had made the mistake of expecting another conventional attack. Instead, they had faced the new tactics that the Alliance had developed together. Captain Chun joined her at the viewing window. The human wore a new uniform that bore both Earth and Kethmori symbols on the shoulders. It had been her idea to create joint insignia for their combined fleet. "Beautiful world," Captain Chun said, looking down at the planet. "It is good to see it without fourth ships in orbit," Zixtar replied. "For a while, I thought we would never see home again." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the traffic of ships moving between the planet and the orbital stations. Human vessels worked alongside Kethmori crystal ships, unloading supplies and helping with reconstruction efforts. "Admiral," Captain Chun said, "I've received a message from Earth. The Exploration Council wants to establish a formal alliance with your people." Zixtara turned to look at her friend. Over the past months, she had learned to read human expressions fairly well. Captain Chun looked pleased, but there was something else in her face. "Concern, perhaps. And what do you think of this idea?" Zixtara asked. "I think it's necessary," Captain Chun said. "The Vorth aren't gone. They just retreated to rebuild their forces. And there are other aggressive species out there. Neither of our peoples is strong enough to face them alone." Zixtara nodded. She had come to the same conclusion. The galaxy was a more dangerous place than either humans or Kethmori had realized. But together, They had proven that they could stand against that danger. There's something else, Captain Chun continued. The Council wants to establish a joint military academy, a place where humans and Kethmori can learn to fight together, to develop new tactics and strategies. And they want you to run it. Zixthara guessed. Captain Chun smiled. Actually, they want us to run it. Together. Zixthara felt a surge of excitement. During the battles against the Vorth, she had discovered something about herself that she had never known existed. She was good at warfare. Not the brutal, destructive kind that the Vorth practiced, but the careful, creative kind that saved lives and protected the innocent. I would be honored to work with you, she said. There's one more thing, Captain Chun said. We've been getting reports from other species in this sector. The news about our victory over the Vorth has spread. Some of the other civilizations that were hiding from the Vorth are starting to come out of hiding. She handed Zixthara a datapad containing the latest intelligence reports. Zixthara read through them with growing amazement. The Threnody had emerged from their hidden colonies and were asking about joining the alliance. The Alkari had sent messages of congratulations and offers of technological exchange. Even some species that neither humans nor Kethmori had met before were reaching out to make contact. It seems, Captain Chun said, that standing up to bullies inspires other people to be brave too. Zixthara thought about this. For centuries, the Kethmori had tried to avoid conflict, to find peaceful solutions to every problem. But sometimes, she now realized, the only way to preserve peace was to be willing to fight for it. Captain, she said, or should I say, Admiral Chun? Captain Chun laughed. The promotion hasn't been made official yet. But yes, they're planning to put me in charge of the new Allied Defense Force. Admiral Chun, Zixthara continued. When we first met, you told me that humanity had always stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. But I think you've taught my people something else as well. What's that? You've taught us how to stand up for ourselves. 3 weeks later, the Joint Academy was officially opened on a small moon orbiting Kethmer Prime. The facility was a marvel of combined human and Kethmori engineering. Crystal spires rose from metal foundations, and training areas where cadets could learn everything from space combat to diplomatic protocol. Admiral Chun stood before the first class of graduates, looking at the mixed group of humans and Kethmori, who would become the first generation of Allied Defense Force officers. Some would become ship captains, others tactical specialists. Still others would focus on engineering or communications. But all of them had learned the most important lesson that the Alliance had discovered. Different species, working together, could achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. Today, Admiral Chun said to the graduating class, "You go out into the galaxy as representatives of something new. You represent the idea that civilizations can choose to help each other instead of conquering each other." Admiral Zixthara stood beside her, watching the young faces in the audience. Some were human, some were Kethmori, and a few were from other species that had recently joined the Alliance. "The galaxy is still a dangerous place," Zixthara added. "There are still species like the Vorth out there, who believe that strength comes from destroying others. But today, you carry with you the knowledge that real strength comes from lifting others up." After the ceremony, the two admirals walked through the academy grounds. The setting sun cast long shadows across the training fields, where the next class of cadets was already hard at work. "Do you ever wonder," Admiral Chun asked, "what would have happened if we hadn't received that first distress call?" Admiral Zixthara considered this. "My people would probably be extinct. Your people would still be alone among the stars. The Vorth would control this entire sector of space. And now?" Zixthara smiled. "Now the galaxy is a little bit safer. And it's going to get safer still." They stopped at the edge of the Academy's main plaza. where a memorial had been built to honor those who had died in the fight against the Vorth. Names from both species were carved into crystal and metal panels that caught the light of the setting sun. "Admiral," said a young voice behind them. They turned to see Cadet Williams, one of the top students in the current class. She was human, but she spoke fluent Kethmori and had specialized in crystal ship engineering. "Yes, Cadet?" Admiral Chun replied. "Ma'am, we just received a distress call from the Epsilon sector. A species called the Valdris is being attacked by something called the Shadow Fleet. They're asking for help." Admiral Chun and Admiral Zixthara looked at each other. Another call for help. Another chance to prove that the galaxy didn't have to be ruled by fear and aggression. "Prep the fleet," Admiral Chun said. "It sounds like someone needs the Alliance." As they walked toward the command center, Admiral Zixthara reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day, when her broken fleet had sent out a call for help. Then, they had been alone and hopeless. Now, they were part of something larger. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of people willing to answer when others called for help. And as long as that remained true, there would always be hope among the stars. Behind them, the memorial caught the last rays of the setting sun, and the names carved there seemed to glow with their own light. Heroes who had given everything to protect strangers they had never met. The foundation upon which a new kind of civilization was being built. A civilization where helping others wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the strong thing to do.